Hi Zoe, lovely for you to join me on this conversation with the Secrets of Talent. Thank you very much. I think we'll just get sort of straight into it. And my first question to yourself really is, what was your first ever job? And so what was that journey like that sort of took you up to becoming a Chief People Officer of Hudson Holdings?
Well, thank you very much for your time, I would say. So, thanks for the invite to share knowledge, a little bit about my journey as well. So, my first ever job, there is no correlation, but it's had a very big bearing on my career, although never knew that at the time. I worked in the travel sector. So, my first job was a YTS youth training program scheme and for Lum Poly actually. So Lum Poly don't exist now, but I booked holidays for people. That's what I did, and that's what I learned to do, and I absolutely loved it. And it was such a joy to help people to discover new parts of the world. It wasn't like you didn't have your Airbnbs, you didn't have, I was 15 when I left school, so this was my first job at 15, 16, and I loved it. I just loved exploring the world from the seat of a chair, and helping people, find that dream destination. So what then that led me to is working on cruise ships. So most people that, if you looked into my background, you'll see that I worked in the cruise sector for some years, and I worked on the ships as a croupier. And through that experience, I moved shoreside and started doing recruitment for croupiers and casino staff to work on the ships. And it was my first, I guess, introduction, what we call talent acquisition now. So I did that for some years and worked in helping the crew move from ship to ship, which is all people oriented. And that was the first kind of my first, I guess, entrance into HR, although a very specific niche part of it. And of course, that was, I was 20, 25 through this period of my life. I'm now sort of nearly double that age. So a lot's happened in between that time. But one of the things that really changed for me in HR was doing a more regional role, and being at the end of a headquarter location. So taking direction and strategy from a headquarters and then working in the headquarters, giving the strategy across multiple geographies and markets was real game changing, because you got to see both ends of the coin, so to speak, and a lot more empathy and compassion for what happens at sort of a local versus global level. And that was probably a good transition. And that was in 2016 when I joined Adidas. So I went from a local diesel, a localized job in North America, and went into a global role in Adidas. So that was 7-8 years ago now.
Oh wow! I'm sure you mentioned Adidas. I'm sure employer brand is something we'll definitely touch on shortly. But you did mention talent acquisition, or what's called talent acquisition now. So clearly you must have been on the hiring side of talent acquisition. And do you remember what your first hire was? I mean, obviously hiring has many sort of different formats, but particularly hiring into your own team, and what was that like for yourself?
I didn't hire into my own team until I did a lot of recruitment for croupiers. So my first kind of recruitment drive was like speaking to 50 people, and saying, I mean, everybody wanted to work on a cruise ship. It was like a dream job. And my job was to set the scene on what happens on board. And it had this ideal expectations of people. So I remember vividly kind of being the conduit to saying, this is what it's like, life is like, it might not be for everybody, and that was helping people shift into those roles. But my first direct hiring was not until in my own team, was not until probably 2005, about then. And I remember her name was Nikki, and I remember we just met, we clicked, it was instant, like, I have to work with you. And we become good friends over time. We still are. And I remember it very vividly. And I didn't have you might have thought I have a script. No, that went out the window. I just intuitively went with she wasn't from HR. She was from the business. And I thought, you've got all the ingredients, I think, that makes, I don't know if it's a typical HR person, but I think if you're compassionate, you care for people, and you've got a moral compass as well as a sort of a legal one. You've got to work within those two frameworks. And yeah, we worked together for a number of years. It was great. I do remember that
So,
vividly.
so it seems that instinct plays a role in sort of spotting potential.
I mean, I think so, and I can't say that everybody's born with a, you know, with this intuitive. I mean, everybody's born with an intuitive nature. Whether they're tapped into it or not, I think is another story. But for me, it's always been highly intuitive. You know, I haven't always made the 100% best decisions, but for most part it has been, you know, can I see myself working with you? And I think all of us are driven by emotion to some degree. We buy products and services because we have an affiliation or something towards that product or service, whether we can explain it or not, but we have a feeling. And you know, if you go into a furniture store, you like this sofa and not that one. You go into a car dealership and you like that car and not that one. There's a part of us that has an innate, you can also call it bias, by the way. There's an innate attraction that we have towards people and things, for sure, for sure.
Oh, that's quite an interesting thing. And I think when it comes to hiring good talent, they kind of feed into a sort of wider culture within the company. And I think, how does sort of company culture play a role or in impacting the nurturing of talent within an organization?
So this is something that I think is super, it's crystal clear for me. And sometimes people get very lost in this, people being organizations. We always have to keep doing this dance with why are we here? Why do we offer this product or service to a target audience, right? Why is that? And there's a set of values that we generally develop in an organization. We have them as individuals, usually linked to our identity. And if we're really truthful, when you go back to those values and we keep testing them over a period of time, because things do change, are we really living those values? Now, if you hire against those values with the culture that's embedded around those values, whether it's trust, honesty, service, quality, whatever it might be, if you are generally hiring people based on their value structure, then usually it's a hire that you can nurture really well, because you'll always have even in conflict, even in adversity, you can always agree because your values will be aligned somewhere. They'll be overlapping in most situations. If you've hired against the values that you live by every day, that's in your culture every day. Where it doesn't work is a lot of organizations have values, they don't work with them, they don't have them embedded in their culture, they hire against it, and then there's disillusionment because it's not what people are thinking that they're walking into. So I think that this very delicate dance with values, mission, purpose, if it stays true to the core of the organization and you hire against that, then you can't really go wrong. It's when you veer off of that and you stop having the North Star of why you're here, what's your purpose in servicing this target audience or demographic of people. If that gets blurry and you lose clarity, that's when it can kind of like, you know, you mishire or you mismatch people in your organization, whether it's vendors, you know, gig workers, employees. Yeah, I think you've got to be true to what you do. Be specific about what you do and target your people that want that service or product that you're aiming to have. So I think that's it, the same way that consumers are attracted to a brand or a business or a service, the same happens for your employees. Exactly the same.
With company culture, does it become a thing that needs to be very transparent at the beginnings? Because obviously company culture and culture generally, and values and sort of and ethics and all those around it, what means something to you may mean something different to another person. But does it need to be something that's sort of laid out in writing and quite transparent, quite upfront, or is it a conversation, or is it just something that needs to be said and by word of mouth?
I think it's your behavior. Your behavior, you know, if you think of children, so children watch and they repeat, they listen, they repeat. We're not that different when we're adults, right? We're assumed that we have more intelligence because we've got more experiences in life. And the thing that strikes me is that we are still children and we still learn and adopt the same behaviors. We watch, we listen. So we're looking at leaders, we're looking at people in the public space, and we generally have a sense of what's right or wrong. But most part, we default to what we're being shown, societal, you know, conditioning, whatever you might call it. So if we see certain things happening, we're more likely to just follow that path. I have a very strong opinion, and I know that you may not want to focus on this today. I do not believe that you need a diversity and inclusion strategy. It should just be a part of the culture to be inclusive. It should just be a part of accepting people from all sorts of backgrounds and allowing them to show up in the way that they need to. Now, of course, we need strategies to do that, because it's not obvious to everybody. In the same way, company culture is the same thing. If your values are around quality and acceptance and trust and all those things, then behave that way. And that becomes more attractive to people who want to work in the brand. And guess who we're influenced by? Celebrities and our friends. You only need to go onto any social platform, and we take advice from people close to us. So if somebody's saying my employee is brilliant because they do X, Y, Z, that's gonna, lead me to be more curious about, oh, maybe I want to work there. Or I think generally speaking, people are your advocates, your employees, and if they say bad things, not going to attract anyone to your company. And if they're saying great things about the culture because they're hired against a set of values which is aligned to them and suits them, it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, and I mean, in my experience, I've found that it, certain, for example, use the example of diversity inclusion. I think there needs to be a sense of direction. Having a diversity inclusion strategy can sometimes be very corporate, but it can work for some organizations. And I think every organization is different, because some organizations have zero diversity inclusion direction. And one of the benefits of having a diversity inclusion strategy is the fact that it gives a sense of direction. You're right. I think the best scenario and the best place to be is in a situation where diversity inclusion, it becomes a norm. It becomes a topic of health, for example, where you need something that protects somebody's health. In a similar way, where you have diversity inclusion, it becomes a norm within the realms of hiring and nurturing talent and the talent acquisition journey. And I think, but then you rightly touched on earlier as well about kind of working with big brands. And how does the employer brand itself, we've kind of touched on it already, but how does the employer brand itself have an impact on talent acquisition?
In the same way that, if we take an example of what you're wearing as a top right now, or the pair of glasses that we've both got on, why is it that we purchase those products? It's no different. It's marketing. It's appealing to us, and we like things that please us. Subconsciously, consciously, we gravitate towards things where we feel a level of acceptance or belonging, because as human beings, we all want significance, belonging, connectedness. So we're naturally going to gravitate towards things that are important to us, whether again they're explicit or they're not, expressed or not. So in having the strong employer branding, as long, in my view, it's better to say nothing if you're not living it than to go out with a brand that's not quite living up to the expectation. And I've worked for a few of those companies that say they're one thing and then do another. And this is just kind of like, it's just inauthenticity, and people can feel it, they know it. So from a consumer lens, if you walk into certain brands or stores, or you meet certain people, you feel a connectedness, and that's what we're all looking for. Everybody is. It's the basis of life. You can call it love if you want. It's a form of feeling and acceptance of belonging in where you are, or what you are towards that thing that you're wearing or sitting on or driving or living in. So I think it's an important aspect of showing authentically what you do, and how you do it. I don't think employer branding is so different than branding for your consumers, because consumers and employees are the same in my view. They should be treated with care and respect in the same way. We do a lot of data insights, customer segmentation on our target audiences, where they shop, how much they spend, when they spend it on. If we did the same for our employees, exactly the same, we would be so tapped in to target the right audience that we want to hire, that's aligned with our consumers. And let's face it, that we are also attracted to people who are like us. So if we go into a store and we see people that represent something that resembles us, there's automatic trust. So by having that kind of consumer employee attractiveness in the same way, for me, is a win-win. I wouldn't treat employees differently.
You mentioned
Yes,
a good point there. You mentioned a good point there. And in fact, you mentioned certain, if you want to call them metrics, or if you want to call them, like, for example, customer segmentation, etc., etc. What would be sort of like a few of the ones that you'd use in the hiring process? So, for example, that you could use examples from working out the customer segmentation. What would you use for the hiring process?
well, off the
Hiring
top,
and nurturing talent as well. So we're talking also
yeah.
internal talent as well.
Yeah, because I believe that when you do talent acquisition, whatever you're measuring these people on should be a standard of performance that they're measured on consistently throughout their employee journey. They shouldn't be so so different in my view. I think that we should be looking for, so yes, we've got our normal, if you look at something like Office Vibe, which looks at 10 factors and looks at happiness levels across these 10 factors, not just happiness levels, but engagement as well. So it's like a pulse. I think this is a much more richer way to understand very moment to moment what's happening. So it's not a static moment in time that you're measuring something, a bit like NPS, except for its employee net promoter score, not just NPS. But if you look at it from that basis, and then you start to drill down, like, where are your employees working most efficiently? Is it at home? Is it in an office? Is it at this time? Is it this time? Because we're conditioned to say that you need to work these days, these hours, because there's a contract of employment. What if we enabled people to say, when do you work best? Can we modify our framework to capitalize on that? And what would that mean to you? So what benefits, example, would be what turns on your employees, and is it what you want to turn on in them? For example, if you look at the same way of, where do you spend your time, where do you spend most of your money, where do you, I mean, you can translate those into very meaning units of information to kind of track where your employees are. In the same way, do you prefer working on a mobile? I'm not saying people should work out their beds, by the way, but a lot of people like to check their emails at a certain time of the day because it fits in with their lifestyle. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that most people need some level of freedom. Okay, so the contract is, you're offering this skill for this salary. That's the contract. There's no feeling in this other than a written, expressed contract. How you do it is quite another. And if you allow freedom, the people of freedom within a framework, the same way you mentioned the D&I, a direction of travel, but let people self-serve a bit more, get to know what they want and what this population wants, and start to track it, measure it, and be transparent about it. What does it mean? What does it give you? What does it help? And that way you can tailor your advertising, your marketing more towards your target employee. And I actually, just on to close off that response, I'd love to ask employers, do you know your target employee, like what your target employee is? And I'm not talking about physicality, I'm talking about technical skill, about collaboration, about all sorts of things that are necessary to be successful in business.
And I think you've touched on something quite important, which is probably going to be important for my last question, which is around the future of work, but something around data insights and data around employee profile, because the nature of people and the nature of talent is changing. You know, people now want to work from home. Some people are thinking about how they work. Do they want to travel? Do they not want to travel? Are they introverts, extroverts? We're learning a lot more about people. And I think kind of leads me to my last and final question, which is around the future of work. And what does the future of work hold for talent acquisition and nurturing talent?
So I think there's something that's happening that's very subtle right now, but it's not obvious to everybody. So I follow McKinsey, Bain, Deloitte, PwC in various ways around developing culture, organization effectiveness, etc., etc. And I'm particularly interested in this because it's a personal interest of mine. We are looking at the human dimensions, which is spirituality, emotional, physical, mental, social kind of dimensions of a human being, because we've all got these certain parts of us that need to be developed in collaboration with each other. That's how we go through life, and sometimes we might exercise more mental growth, not emotional growth. I mean, we're all unique and different, but I think there's this this spirituality aspect that McKinsey have talked about for the last year now. Now, whether you believe in spirituality, because it can mean different things to different people, we all have a spirit. So call it personality, call it energy, call it something, you know, that's very unique. What makes it unique to us is what I'm talking about, spirit. I think we haven't tapped in to what a good spiritual place would be for people to work. Right. So again, it's the mixture of a culture and understanding the culture and what you want the culture to be, what it is, who survives and thrives in that culture, understanding the makeup of that, whether it's and it's through holistic, you know, science and theory is a delicate balance between proving with facts and figures and having a philosophy and an idea. And I think these two needs to dance with each other, because, you know, just purely on fact and figures gets you one result, but it comes back down to head and heart coherence, the thinking and the feeling. They have to be in combination with each other, otherwise you're just lopsided in thinking. So it's quite a deep topic, but one that I think, in order to have a wonderful future of the workplace could be home, it could be in an office, Timbuktu, could be in a number of ways. The point is that people need to know themselves well enough, what they work in well enough, what they need to do their job, what resources they need, and to be able to self-serve their own happiness, because an employer is not in charge of your happiness. So as an individual, that's ours. So I think that we need to make it more friendly to be yourself, and to just really identify what the technical need is, and be clear about what framework we need to work in, but allow people to serve themselves within that framework.
And just just like a short response to from an employer perspective, what is there a sort of a minute so that you can sort of touch on that as well?
From an employer perspective, so example would be, I firmly believe that you're an entrepreneur in your space, right? If I'm in HR, I consume an HR box, right? So we don't like to be put in boxes, but the reality is we live in box. If you've got a roof over your head and walls, we live in a box. So if you kind of think about, how do I uncap and unleash what I do in a very, or accountants, or we've all got a discipline to some degree, but we can be very entrepreneurial in the space that we have. So it's just about, where are my boundaries? Where are my guardrails? And knowing those, but everything in between is subject to discussion, and of course collaboration. We can't just have always what we want, but what the greater good is, the collective. So I think encouraging people to be entrepreneurial in the space of their technical skill that they occupy, and to give enough breadth and space to do that, and time, but also be really clear about what's not in your lane. Let's say, you know, it's great you can give input to other people, but knowing where your boundaries are helps to keep people a little bit more focused, in my view.
Yeah, and there's a term called entrepreneurship. So not entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship,
That's
where
it. That's
you're an entrepreneur in the workplace. Really appreciate your time for joining Secrets of Talent. Really appreciate your thoughts and comments on some of the topics we discussed. Thank you very much.
no problem. You're super welcome. It was a delight, and I hope it's useful to listeners and watchers.